What's up, everybody? This is Zach with EM Weekly. I am back with the first episode of the year. That's not me. I actually dropped an episode today, which means nothing to you because I don't know when you're listening to this. But I am here with Doug. Doug, you may recognize if you listen to Disaster Tough, but we're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of city interagency coordination. Why Doug has probably the coolest job in New York City when it comes to emergency management, and a little bit of his history. So, Doug, thank you for joining me. How's it going?
It's going great, Zach. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I won't make you rehash everything you talked about Disaster Tough. Like I said, people want to go listen to that. They should. But give us sort of the short and sweet of how you ended up in your position, maybe a little bit of like who you are. I probably should introduce you officially, and then how you got to where you are.
We'll be right back after this quick break for ads.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. If you served in the military, you've probably worn Proper Apparel. Proper Apparel is now reaching out to first responders and those who love the outdoors. Check out Proper Apparel. From the outdoors to the EOC, wear proper. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
Sure. My name is Doug Bainton. I've been a New York City firefighter for almost 20 years. I've been at New York City Emergency Management for about 4.5. And the way I got into my current role, which is citywide interagency coordinator, I'm one of many in a unit combined of New York City Fire Department, Police Department, some other agencies, a couple civilians. It's a nice mixed group. And we apply through a request that comes from NYSEM to Fire Department operations, and we submit our resume. We do an interview with New York City Emergency Management, and you get the job and you go.
It's probably like, so I told you this when we talked offline, but when I was starting my emergency management career officially, professionally, a little over 10 years ago, there was a video that popped up on New York, I think it was NYC OEM at the time, not NYSEM.
Right.
And they had a video basically talking about what our city, the interagency coordinators within the city. And I saw this and I was like, why don't all emergency managers do this? As I was moving into my professional career, I became a state watch officer, which is sort of the closest thing we have to that. And while I was there, I was like, all right, we need to be more active and like trying to find the issues ahead of time so that we're not reacting to them, that we can lean into this. And myself and another emergency manager at the state even built a proposal for, essentially saying no one should be working out of the state EOC unless there's a reason like it's activated, which only happens, a handful of times a year. Everybody else should be working at boots on the ground as close to the folks that we need to, our constituents and the other agencies we work with, as possible. So I saw this video from New York OEM and I was like, this makes so much sense to me. Why don't other cities and why doesn't emergency management function this way anyways? Because, you guys respond to everything, right? You respond to the little stuff and the big stuff. So maybe just give a little bit of like what prompted this and how does the city use you? And how do you differ maybe from a typical emergency manager?
So, like you said, we do respond to pretty much everything, anything from what we would call a single alarm fire, but it might be in a church or some other sensitive type of location, a hotel, that kind of thing, to second, third, fourth, fifth alarms and bigger. We do water main breaks, anything infrastructure related, street undermining, steam explosions, building collapses, we run the gambit. And I think there was a time back, when this unit started where just, the people had like the people had an idea that were in office that, we need this coordination. It's a thing. How can we build this? And the idea, I don't know exactly how the idea of using the fire department, police department members, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Because we speak the tactical language. And if we can learn the more strategic language and put those two together, we can become a bridge that, changes the game. Because everybody, and in New York City, it's very like this, I'm sure, and even in small towns, agencies are siloed. Everybody's in their own house doing their own thing. And when the thing happens and you all got to come together, if you haven't been working together, it's very hard to get what's commonly called a battle rhythm, right?
Yeah.
So that slows everything down, So we show up, and if I go to a fire, I've been in the fire department a long time, and I know I can look at the fire and I got an idea of what's happening, and I can kind of see, okay, this is where this is headed. It's good or bad. And now if I come back to 10,000 foot view, I can maybe see something that the incident commander doesn't see and a resource that they might need. And I might be able to come up and say, hey, chief, I see this and this. Do you need a crane? Because once you get to this point, you're going to need a crane. And I know the fire department doesn't have that crane that they're going to need.
Yeah.
And they might say to me, wow, I wouldn't, you're like 8 steps ahead of me. But yeah, if you could get that going, that'd be great. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing where, sure, emergency managers we're resource providers. But if you don't have that kind of background or even association, you don't have to have been a firefighter or a police officer. But if you don't have that basic understanding of what that tactical move is going to be and how it fits to the resource you can provide, it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you hit on a couple things there. So in the course of, I was a firefighter, EMT, did some time as a cop in the military. I've got a lot of the tactical, roles, and I moved up in some positions where I was in the quasi, strategic tactical level within agencies. But when I came into emergency management, it was almost entirely responder based. There really wasn't a lot of sort of those professional emergency managers that came up through the academic programs and, some of the newer approaches through FEMA, like the basic and advanced academies and stuff. And so we all responded to emergency management as sort of responders, which anyone who's been through emergency management for a long time, there was advantages to that, but there was also disadvantages to that because we got into the weeds and we often didn't sort of get that high level view. Now you kind of fast forward today and we have much more of the professionals who never had a response background. And I'm starting to recognize that there's a ton of benefit to coming up through that pipeline, but we're missing out on certain things that I think could hurt emergency managers or at least an individual in their career field because they don't have that opportunity. And this is why I've advocated and foot stomped this. I have an entire episode about it. I tell people, get out from behind your desk. Don't sit there and think only at these very high levels because those types of disasters only come around every so often. But like you said, the fire that has, it's a multi-residence, it's a bunch of people who are from out of town and don't have the resources locally. That stuff happens every day in your community. And so when I think of this, I think the interagency model could potentially work across the country where there's a lot of agencies that are single person shops.
Absolutely.
Sure, you can open the EOC, but if you're sitting there by yourself, because it's a small community and there isn't that support, that mission still needs to be accomplished. And I think that's where you and your fellow interagency coordinators could potentially help, small agencies figure out how do you run an EOC with a very small amount of people? Because that's basically what you're doing until it's a big enough situation that you're like,
right,
I need to call back and get more support on this, right?
Yeah, we have access to the EOC at all times. I mean, we're very fortunate in our resources here in the city, But honestly, my job, a cell phone, a portable radio, and my vehicle is all I use to do what I do. I do more talking and thinking. The physical tools I use are limited. It's those relationships that you've built or that you're building. And, it's interesting because I've also seen where we started, police or firefighters became the emergency manager, and the profession has moved and worked very hard to move away from that being the sole model. But I think, like you said, we've gone kind of to the opposite end, where now you've got folks coming into the field with no concept of what an actual emergency really is and what one isn't, because there's a difference. And emergency is in the title, emergency manager, right? So folks are getting into the weeds with these future ideas about stuff that haven't happened, and that's great. But if you can't handle the thing when it happens, because it's going to happen when you don't expect it, you're in a bad spot, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be able to have that kind of tactical mindset, not background. You don't have to have been a police officer. You don't have to, but you have to understand and accept the fact that tactics is a big part of strategy. It feeds strategy, right? So you have to be able to. That's where we're kind of like a hybrid. We're a lot like liaisons in many ways.
Yeah.
But we're like a hybrid between a liaison and an emergency manager, a full-time emergency manager. We work in ops. I'm briefing anyone from the commissioners, the mayor, all the way down to the Proby firefighter who's asking questions.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to move fluidly in and out of that realm and be able to do we run interagency meetings with bosses of, the utility companies, the fire, police, everybody, everything from chief level, staff chiefs, all the way down to, your field operations levels. And you have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I think coming out of college with just your book knowledge will make that very difficult.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is the bond and kinship that comes from suffering mutually with other people.
Yes.
Is you can't replicate that through exercises or training. It really does come down to like sometimes just being in the trenches with other folks. It proves you can you have the skills and the mindset to think, like you said, dynamically with very little equipment and solve major problems, which I think is like the coolest part of emergency management is like, we're always resource scarce and the problems are always gigantic. So, being able to step out and sort of, your emergency management role and just sort of like appreciate what it's like to be on the scene. And I think every emergency manager, I know there's a lot of agencies, like I know we work with Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and their folks will do ride-alongs and stuff with the fire department and police department and stuff to sort of get a sense of the city. And I'm sure this takes place at a lot of agencies around the country, but I think that consistent working relationship where you're like, you're an extension of those agencies is like the best case scenario. And I know in my experience, one of the things that I'm really lucky with between the podcast and us, working with many agencies across the country is we get to see all sorts of different models of this. From the agencies that are basically their own little isolated, like you said, they kind of live in their own world. They still work good with other agencies, but they just aren't necessarily as integrated as other places. Right. Some places where they're like, I wish someone would call and ask me for help. I got nothing to do but plans here. This is great. I'm checking all the boxes and making our requirements and, doing my best to make sure that our community is ready for whatever's coming up. But I don't get to play that often to like, you're like probably the as far on the other spectrum as possible where you guys are always busy, always running into it. So
yeah, we don't deal with planning or any of that. I mean, the only planning type of thing we ever do is planning the next meeting and planning what resources are required to get this building demolished.
Yeah, you guys are in the planning P all the time versus like actually trying to, which is again, where like, I think I want to stay, like, I'm not saying every emergency management agency should only be stuck on like, response mode.
Of course.
I think it's a blend between the two, but I think when I see what you guys are doing and I hear how you work with the EOC, and how the relationships between all the agency works, that's what we should try to figure out. So, I guess one of the things I wanted to ask is sort of how do you start to see this as something that other communities should look to build out their programs, or like what sort of thoughts do you have on like, how could this work maybe elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. So the one thing that we find in New York City is because we're so big and there's so many resources, everybody's got so many things. We'll have people come from small towns, even small countries, and look at what we've got and go, I could never do this. And I always pull out my portable radio and my cell phone. I always tell them, if we went to your town, if you gave me your equivalent of these two things, I could show you how to do this. You don't need, it's relationships, and we talk almost ad nauseum about this in the emergency management realm, right?
Yeah.
Exchange business cards before the disaster and all this stuff, but I found that's not only the only thing. You're, like you said, you're in the trenches. You're building these relationships. You're going to see, that person again in another incident in your town. Don't just like, oh, hey, good to see you. How's your mom? Understand what it is they need so that you can support them better. Because if you learn how they operate, you can be better prepared to help them get their job done faster next time. Don't just wait for them to come and expect them to figure the whole thing out. Now, you're not running the job. But,
everyone listen to that. What he just said is very, very, very important. You can actually get ahead of the disaster. You can stay ahead of the curve if you know your partners well. If you know that the fire department has a limitation on this capability and it's something you bring to the table, you don't have to figure that out during the disaster. Nope. You've been there, you've seen it. You say, like you said, it's the crane. If you know, because you have a relationship with the crane operators in the city from another disaster that you reacted to, and you know this incident based on what you're seeing is going to require a crane, you go, hey, chief, I got you. And they go, sweet. And there's no need to make like a big deal out of it. You have that flow. Right.
It's like EM, endless meetings, right? I mean, that's what it drives me. It drives me nuts because I've seen it time and time again across the country where everybody wants to have a meeting to talk about the next meeting or what they should do. And it's sometimes somebody has the answer. Just open your mouth and provide the answer and let's get it done, because we're in the field. We have to get this done. There's no Zoom meeting later on today.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about sitting, like you said, sitting in the office and trying to get outside is until you get out and actually do the thing, smell the flood, see the impacts, talk to the people, everything's conceptual.
Yeah.
It's all conceptual. It's just numbers on a screen. It's a video on the news. But until you get there and hear the sounds and, people asking you, why didn't you answer your phone? It's, well, because I have 14 fire trucks around me, power saws, the electric company's doing their thing in the street. There's a steam main hissing and I can't get away from it type of thing, where trying to get to a quiet space. Until you understand that, I think it makes you a better emergency manager. It's like in our job in the fire department, they tell you if you're studying for boss, like lieutenant or something.
Yeah.
Just the act of studying makes you a better firefighter.
Yeah.
Right. It's very similar concept. If you know there's a piece of the emergency management realm that you're in that you don't get to do, find a way to go see it. So at least, even if you're never going to become a responder, even if you never develop a CIC program, at least have that understanding so that if and when that time comes, you can do it. Or you can help your colleagues call out and go, hey, I see you're at this thing. We have access to XYZ just in case. Just that little thing can probably save 30 minutes to an hour in the field.
Yeah. And I think you kind of also talked about this, but like until you see how busy an emergency scene is, and again, I've been fortunate to be on both sides of this, from, the person going through the door to working at the state EOC and taking the requests. I think oftentimes a lot of us, especially when we're at the EOCs, we're like, why are we not getting enough information from the field? What are these guys doing? Like, there's a huge disaster going on and no one is talking to us. Mm-hmm. And until you're there, I think USAR teams, IMATs, and wildfire, incident management folks are probably get it the best because they go into communities where they don't have the infrastructure that they're used to, but they build out this sort of information sharing system and they have this get it done attitude, and they make do with what they can. And they're a good, again, similar to what you do, and they're like a good sort of, bridging of the gap between the EOC and an incident, in a way that sort of, I guess, develops you to appreciate both sides and be flexible and make those decisions really quickly. And if you haven't sort of been in any of those positions, you can't. And it's not that you're you might be the best emergency manager in the whole world. But like you said, you don't have that context and that understanding of like, I'm here, I'm looking at the fire chief's trying to keep all of his people alive and rescue everyone from inside. And their assistant fire chief, you know, she's the ops chief now. So she's trying to make sure that all of the tasks that have to be executed on scene are being accomplished. And then the police officer over there is dealing with, you know, the criminal element of this and road, you know, the traffic issues and all this other stuff, crowd control. All these folks are working really, really hard. They need stuff. They need help, but they don't have the bandwidth to even ask for it. Right. And so that's why I think it's really cool. So I don't even
see it sometimes. Like they just can't.
Right. You're task saturated.
Job, they can't think that far ahead because they're going to lose track of their priority feature. And that's where we come in.
Yeah. You're basically buying them some decision-making room, and perhaps they're going to be better suited to save lives because they're not like, oh crap. All right. This is a giant bill. I got to call the Red Cross,
right? Make
sure that they're coming down. We're going to be using a lot of water. I probably should, make sure that, the power, light and water folks are all here.
Right.
You come in and you go, all right, let me take this off your plate. Because this is actually my area of expertise right now. Mm-hmm. And now the chief is like, oh, cool. All right. I need to get, water on that fire over there. I need to get that person out of that window and down here. EMS can deal with, it's just, you're relieving them of the burden of everything else. And it's not to say that the rest of the stuff isn't important, that chiefs don't do this daily across the country, because they do. But what I found in just even my personal experience, again, I literally tried to model my approach to emergency management because I was in a single shop for 8 years at the university. And, at first, no one knew what to do with me. And by the time I left there, the police chief, the fire chiefs, they would call me first and say, hey, we got a major thing going. Can you come help us out? Because I could get there, sit up next to them, and run essentially an EOC for a small incident, support them with all sorts of things. And a lot of times it was just making notifications, making phone calls, connecting the dots so that they didn't have to worry about that. It was a huge burden off them. And it was fun for me because it's the same thing I'd be doing in the EOC. But for most incidents, it's unnecessary. You don't need to bring a whole EOC together. It's really, you can manage a lot of it from the scene. So, and I just, again, I want to foot stomp it again and again and again. It's all about working those muscles before the big one. Because when the really, really big one hits, are you going to be in the field? Probably not. Nope. But because you've spent all that time at those mini disasters that happen in every single community, I promise you, every community in this country has building fires, has water failures, has electrical failures. Every single one of those is a rep. So when it's time to, do the heavy lift, you're strong enough and you know how to do it, and you're not going to have an issue with it. And it's funny, like when you hang out with folks, FDNY, I mean, you guys are the gods to most of the fire department, right? Everyone looks to FDNY as like this huge, awesome department. When you meet those folks, because you get such exposure to so many different incidents, nothing shakes you guys, right? And so when you feel people, like when you're around people like that, because they've done it all, they've tried different approaches to all these different incidents, they're calm and they make good decisions and they're confident in their decision making. And that only comes with experience and, and of course, training and exercising. But like that real world experience is just, it's bar none. Like there's just no better way to do it. So yeah, everything you're saying is
plenty of full scale exercises. They were well done, well designed. And, they help you identify some gaps before the thing happens. But there, like you said, there's no beating being at the scene and seeing it actually unfold because, how does that saying go? All plans are great until first contact, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can't tell you how many times just in the 4.5 years I've been over here that has come to fruition. They're like, oh, we have a plan for that. And you look at it and you're like, I can't do any of that.
Yeah.
I can't do any of that.
The plan hasn't been updated in a while.
There's a massive protest that's taking half the police department away. So we don't have the manpower to close that many streets, that kind of stuff. Like the insanity that happens in the city on a daily basis is probably beyond comprehension for anyone who's never spent any time here. But I think everything is scalable. I don't believe that what we do is solely something that only New York City or big cities could do. I think it's a mindset. It's just, I think most of us have the tools. You have to be willing to work with what you got, know where you want to go, reverse engineer it, and step by step it. You have to socialize the idea amongst your colleagues and all these other agencies that, hey, let's have a regular once a month, whatever, don't make it weekly or daily. Nobody wants more meetings on their agenda. Just whatever, go to lunch, have a lunch meeting if you have to, but like get out of the office, go do whatever it is, go to a scene, prioritize what project you're working on. And if you hear there's a big thing going on, put that on hold, get out and go see what's going on.
Yeah. The two things that I found helped me the most early on in my career was if you wear a reflective vest, you can basically walk into any room in the world and people assume you're supposed to be there.
Yeah. You're with somebody who belongs there.
The second is coffee, tea, water, whatever. I made it a habit that if I hadn't talked to anyone in a while, I'd send them a message, say, hey, I'll buy you a coffee. Let's go chat. And it's almost every single person's like, yeah, that's great. Like, let's do that. Cause it's a meeting, right? But it doesn't have to feel that way. You spend the first couple minutes just like catching up, see how everyone's doing. Mm-hmm. And you'll immediately get a sense of like, okay, where are we at in a relationship? Like, are things awkward? Are things weird? What's the first thing they bring up? Because you get sort of a sense of like, what is their priority? They might be thinking like, hey man, like we haven't seen you at our monthly, interagency collaboration meeting or something, or we haven't seen you or heard from you in this way. And so it's just a good way to sort of like, oh man, that's right. I really dropped the ball on that. I apologize. Just to keep, because again, emergency managers, what our job is really just like keep the plate spinning on everything. It's, hopefully we have our plans up to date.
Finger, right?
Exactly. And so, but you can't do that all by yourself. You require a network of people. So you do have to build that. And it's awkward. If you don't have that emergency response background, walking into a firehouse is like walking into, a different world that doesn't speak the same language, that doesn't have a culture you recognize. You have to really it takes time to figure it out. And I could promise you, I bet if your first time walking to a firehouse was probably scarier than any fire you ever responded to.
For sure.
That was my experience. I was like, holy crap, I am like,
I hope they like the cake I brought.
Yeah. It is just a different experience. And if you don't understand that and sort of get the how firefighters and cops and EMS communicate with each other, I mean, for one, you're going to hear more swears and, things you've never heard before. Yes, strung together in ways you couldn't imagine. And if you haven't seen that before, you might get there and be like, what is happening right now?
Especially in the city here.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in the city, yes. I did stand-up comedy for a little while. And, it's funny. I met tons of comics. I got to tour around the state for a little bit. Still, hands down, the funniest people I've ever met in my life are firefighters and military people. Like, it's a form of comedy that can only be created through the most tragic, horrendous experiences you can imagine. And so again, if you come up through
with gallows humor.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you do. Yeah. And you'll see it like if you, especially like as a newer emergency manager, as you get into EOCs, you'll see how these dynamic relationships work out and stuff. And you're probably wondering, how do I do that? And it's through this, it's through some way of proving yourself and proving to others that like you can take a beating, that you can think on the fly, that you're not going to get offended because we say things and we do things we don't mean when we're under stress. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more stressful than a disaster. And so like, what Doug has reiterated now several times, and again, I'm probably talking ad nauseum about this, is it doesn't necessarily have to be NICEM's approach to interagency coordination, but the principles that Doug has talked about in the last 30 minutes can be applied anywhere. You have to figure out on your own how that works. But like I said, put on a reflective vest, get a clipboard with some paper on it. And if you show up to a meeting and you sit down in the back, everyone will kind of look at you for a second. And they go, all right, I guess Zach's supposed to be here, you know, and you do that a few times and you start to introduce yourself and you start to say, you know, don't go to a police chief or a fire chief and say, hey, you need to include me. Because they're going to be like, I don't know who you are. And no, I don't. I'm getting along just fine every day. Before I met you, which is at this very moment,
humility,
I didn't know you
goes
existed.
a long way.
Yeah. But if you go to a chief and say, hey, so I saw at this, you know, recent incident that like you had to make a bunch of phone calls, you know, and you were trying to coordinate this mass care response to the hotel fire. What if I came and took that off your plate? Chief's going to go, all right, now you got something to offer. So let's talk. And then when it happens, the next hotel fire, you go, I got you, chief. And you take care of that. I promise you the next time you have an incident, they're going to call you. You're not going to have to force your way in. You're not going to have to convince them that you know what you're doing. You're in. And once you're in the firehouse, you're golden.
You're good.
And until you get kicked out of the firehouse, in which case that's it. You may as well change careers. You're never being invited back again. So this is all like absolute golden nuggets of information that not just relevant to what you do, but just I think for anyone that's coming in.
It's simple too. Like, you know, like I said, in emergency management, the field has kind of gone polar opposite of where it started. And I think we need to kind of reel it back in to find that hybrid blend of at least get the information from the tactical side to help you become better at your job, and then help them understand how you do your job, which, you know, and if you can build that relationship where their expectations and yours are level set, you're in good shape. But go out, meet the emergency manager or whoever handles emergencies for a museum, a hotel, a condo complex, anything, whatever your version of New York City is. We've all got this. Maybe you're in a small town and it's just suburban, right? Okay, so the fire chief, police chief, maybe they are the emergency manager. That's fine. All right, but you have utility workers, you have all this other stuff. All right, so if you're in a medium-sized kind of town or city, but go meet the people that run the things that you might have an incident. What is the incident that keeps you up at night that hasn't happened yet? Figure out who all those people would be, and figure out if you know them, and go meet them.
Yeah,
go talk to them. Find out what do you guys do if you have a evacuation in this building? How do you handle that? Well, I don't know. We haven't had to do it yet. I get that a lot in New York City. So I figure out who at New York City Emergency Management, which ESF essentially handles that. And I say, hey, so-and-so, are you aware do you know the emergency manager so-and-so? Yeah. Do you know, I had a conversation and they have no idea what to do if they evacuate. Do you have a plan that you have worked out with other agencies that you can send to them or that I can give to them? And you just do it like that. You know, and there's no equipment required. It's just a conversation leads to a thought, leads to some thinking ahead, and figure out who the resource is. And so it's still interagency coordination. It's just not an emergency setting. But it gets you out of your office, go meet the people. So when it does hit the fan at that place, and one day it might, you're ready.
Yeah, 100. That's like, honestly, it's probably where we should end the podcast, because that is the money moment right there. You've got a couple things you just said, right? Connecting the dots for folks that may think they know what they're doing. You know, in my case, it was a school district. I reached out to my school district and I was like, hey, you guys kind of had a weird issue with a mass notification you sent out. Could I help you with that? And they said, sure. And now we have dramatically improved our school system's response capabilities and preparedness efforts, all through just like, hey, I just saw you need a little bit of help. My job is to help people. Can I be a part of this? Those are really, really, really critical things.
Just talk it through.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. I think a lot of times we put a lot of weight on training and exercises to be the moment where you're supposed to make these lessons learned, that find those areas of improvement, elevate the things that are working well, but you don't have to overthink it. And that's almost like you're almost sort of talking about like the, left of boom moments in the same way you're talking about the boom moment. Like it doesn't have to be a major incident. It can be a small incident. It doesn't have to be a training or an exercise to have these discussions. It can just be over nothing. You might just like see someone on the street and be like, hey, I just saw you come out of that building. and you're wearing the shirt. You know, I'm trying to connect to someone there just to kind of get an idea how you guys deal with the situation. And they'll be like, oh, cool, that's me. Or I'll reference you, you know, to that person. And now you've got an in, you're learning about it.
It requires a little bit of an outgoing personality. I mean, you have to get out of your shell in this job. You have the word emergency in your title.
There's absolutely a role for people who don't have that capability, but you got to work your butt off if you don't have the gift of gab. You know, the nice thing is, I think like 99% of New Yorkers can't shut up. So
I can talk paint off the wall.
Yeah, you guys will talk about nothing for hours. So that's a huge advantage over a lot of us. But yeah, I think getting out, that was one other thing you said was, you know, sometimes just like going and just like walking around and checking places out. That was one thing I found, you know, again, university setting, but I even did it when I worked for the state because I got to drive all over the state and go to all these different meetings, was check out all these different buildings and like threats and hazards. And sometimes you just like walk through a space, right? Like is there a facility in your community that you've never been to? If you just reach out and say, hey, I just want to get a lay of the land in the event something happens here. You know, fire departments typically, especially for high hazard types of facilities, will do pre-planning. Although Russ, one of my old bosses, always said, no, you just call it planning. It's not pre-planning. It's just planning. You're planning before the plan. You're planning. But
planning is free, right?
Yeah. So, but if you hook up with the fire department, say, hey, when you are all going out and checking out buildings, do you mind if I tag along? Same thing. Doesn't have to be a big deal, but A, it shows that you're interested in what they're doing. B, it shows that you're connected to them. So in the event of an emergency, people just assume you guys are all one team, which you should be. And then C, they've done the work. They have to do this anyways. You're just riding on their coattails, and you're going to make their plans even better because now as you're walking around, they're talking about, okay, well, you've got standpipe over here. You know, here's the annunciator panel. They have these types of horn strobes, blah, blah, blah. You're looking around and going, all right, there's the tornado shelter. Interesting. They do have a water supply here. That's, you know, a backup one. They've got a generator. Like you can look at it from a different perspective. And now that when you build those plans, they're even more effective. So yeah, that's awesome. We
have a lot of buildings that have what we call dual fuel. They can run on, you know, oil, or they have, you know, gas or another source of fuel that they can use for their heating systems. Not all of them have it, but some of them do.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. In the event of oil
I cover Manhattan a lot, you know, primarily, and there's a lot of stuff going on in Manhattan. And when you get a building that's got 100 plus apartments and they have no heat, that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we're talking about a big mass care incident. And that's typical for us. I mean, our mass care, if we have a big mass care incident, for most people, that's like, you know.
Unreal. Yeah. I don't think most communities could imagine where they're going to house. Yeah.
But it's all scalable. It's perspective.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in our role in emergency management, and especially if you're like to your point about you're just stepping into this trying to figure out how you could do what I'm doing and my unit's doing every day is, you know, I said this with John too, just lead with empathy. Just come into it and just let them know that I see where you're at and I'd like to help. How can I help you? I can do this, this, and this. Do you need this? You know, and that goes a long way for whoever it is. It doesn't have to be the fire police chief. It could be a utility incident. And that utility, you know, foreperson might be the first big job they've gone. And they're just like, you know, and you give them any relief and just let them know someone else is here to help. It makes an insane difference.
Yep.
You know,
we're going to end on that because I think that's the perfect place to stop. Doug, really appreciate it. I think it's really cool what you're doing. Like I said, I've kind of modeled a lot of what I've done off of what I've learned from you and your predecessors. And I know other agencies have reached out to you. So I'll share maybe your LinkedIn on the show notes so you can reach out to Doug and connect. But really appreciate it. If you like this episode, subscribe, you know, share it. Leave some comments. If you got questions for Doug, I'm going to have him back on just because I think this is a really good way to sort of help out newer emergency managers and maybe get some of the more experienced ones out from behind their desk is this approach. So we'll be talking more about this stuff. So thanks again, Doug.
Thank you so much, Zach.
Hey, we just want to do a quick pause X to thank our sponsors, L3 Harris, Proper, Paladin by Acela, Impulse, Doberman Emergency Management, and especially all of you who have been donating to our podcast. Thank you for helping us boost the signal. All right, let's jump back in.